If you're like me, and you got no life and there's nowhere to go, then tune in to the Animation Truman Show. You'll be glad you did.
And good morning, friends. I just heard my phone buzz at me. I don't know what that would be. Oh, it's you, Maria. You're going to be missing all but the first 30 minutes. That's fine. That's fine. Today should be, nothing but fun. Nothing but fun. Why? Well, because we're doing the Animation Truman Show, which means that whatever happens, and we're just going to deal with the normal grunt work of getting a cartoon created. So if you're new here, consider liking and subscribing, as you always hear from everybody else. But if you're wondering what the heck I'm doing, well, creating an animated cartoon, which you see here, of which we have essentially 24 minutes of animation done on episode 1, and similar situation with episode 2. So I've got almost an hour of show created, and then what I've been doing over the past, let's say, month is creating a 4-minute webisode, if you will, of the first piece of the show. Right now I'm finishing up the second piece of the show, and we're just kind of creating these little mini webisodes and releasing them on YouTube, hopefully to sort of generate some interest in the show itself, and who knows, maybe even my YouTube channel. So with that in mind, there's a couple directions we could go today, but I did put in the description that we're going to go back to Blender again, which I think kind of makes sense for me, because that's really kind of where my attention's been the last couple days. As you guys know, as you probably know, I'm more or less software agnostic. I want to use the right tool for the job at the time, and the three main tools in my animation toolkit, of course, are Krita, Tahoma 2D, which can be, which is essentially OpenTunes. So OpenTunes and Tahoma 2D, basically the same program. Tahoma is a fork of OpenTunes, so there are small differences, but basically it's the same program. I'm partial to Tahoma for the simple reason that I can cut and paste art from other programs like this, like Krita, into Tahoma. So it's kind of easy to connect things up, if you will. However, it is also true that of late I've been spending more time basically rediscovering my love affair with Blender, because that has been an off again, on again relationship for over 20 years. And so the other day I did a live stream. I think the first hour of it was pretty good. Probably the last hour of it was pretty boring. But kind of recapping what are the things about Blender that make it an interesting option for 2D animation. And indeed it is. So as we kind of work through some things here today, I would say that the mindset would be to just see what problems we encounter and consider what the solutions might be and discover them together along the way. Now, my starting point today, I could be working on music. Obviously, I could be working on the score from webisode 2. So there is probably about 3 minutes of scoring I need to do, and as I had mentioned before, I don't necessarily think I do a great job of doing that kind of work publicly, so I'm thinking I'm probably going to stay offline insofar as scoring is concerned. Morning, Maria. But in the show, we have this shot. So what we're doing is we're jumping to webisode 3 for the moment, since the only thing remaining on webisode 2 is the score. I do hope to get it done this weekend. No guarantees, but I expect that's probably likely, and if it is, then I'll go ahead and be able to release the second webisode, first of the week. But we'll see. We always want to maintain that caveat. No guarantees. Okay, so if we look at the show, what we're doing is we're starting to chug through webisode 3 and basically find things that need to be fixed or improved. And that began with last week doing this shot, which is really kind of the opening part of the sequence where we first meet the king and his evil counterpart, Golek. So the king's name is Vespigi, for those who are keeping score. Hey, Tiny Sally. I got again, my phone's beeping at me. Oh, okay, that's Darren posting a announcement basically about Darren's tea time tomorrow. So those of you who don't know, who might be watching this later as well, if you want to learn a lot about OpenTunes and Tahoma 2D, Darren T, his YouTube channel and Discord, frankly, is a great resource for that. So why Blender? Well, actually, kind of in the 2D animation software space, the truth is it's probably one of the areas where I can contribute the most. If you look at, if you want to know what can be done with Krita, there's a lot of content on my channel about that because I've been using Krita for a couple years now. And a lot of this show was, probably, gosh, at least half, probably more than that, probably 60% of all the animation in the show has been done in Krita. But I have a love-hate relationship with Krita where I'm constantly complaining about the bugs and things like that, while at the same time continuing to come back to it and, get work done. So there is that. But if you want to know what can be done with Krita, you can look at my channel, but you can also look at Ed Tadeo's channel. Ed Tadeo, it's Tadeo, I believe. And Ed's doing some of the best work on planet Earth using Krita as his main animation tool. In my case, as I say, I bounce between them. And what I'm doing this morning is essentially taking this shot from of old. This was done quite a long time ago. And it's not bad. Okay, so the king kind of smiles. You see him sort of chuckle a bit right there, which was done, I'm quite sure, with the Krita Liquify tool. And then he kind of, he's just kind of laughing. Okay, so these components, I think probably what happened back in the day was these components were, like in other words, like the hand, the head, the body, were probably combined in Tahoma, maybe by cutting and pasting, and then that's where the animation took place. So the animation part of it was this, where the hand comes up and then he chuckles. Okay, so given that as a starting point, my question today was, can we improve on that shot? I'm not going to say that definitively we're going to replace the shot that's in the show, that, the constituent pieces are here in Krita, but I'm going to play with it. So last night I did a pencil test, and let's see here. So did a pencil test, and that would be, I wanted to exaggerate it a little bit more, so it's clear that Vespigi turns away. In case you're wondering why, I don't know if you are, but the reason why is when Asher enters the palace, Asher has a tendency to make sort of prophetic proclamations that don't necessarily favor the policies of the king, and in particular the policies of this guy, Golek, who's basically the chief advisor to the king and is always trying to steer the king in somewhat evil directions. So Asher comes into the throne room and kind of says what he has to say. Well, so in this sequence, Golek is like, what does he say? Asher, it's been too long. What brings you here today? Or something to that effect. I can't remember the line of dialogue. I would have to look at the script. But when he says that, Asher sort of waves off the question by saying, "It's always a pleasure to stand in the presence of the king." So he turns his attention away from Golek back to the king, as a sort of veiled insult to Golek. And the king, Vespigi, actually finds that kind of funny. So the relationship between Vespigi and Asher is a weird one. I mean, Vespigi has known Asher since he was a child. Asher's been around even since way back when Vespigi essentially staged a coup prompted by Golek to relieve his brother of the crown. And so Asher's always been sort of part of the picture in Vespigi's life. And he's kind of fond of the old coot, even though whatever Asher has to say, being that Asher is essentially, if we look at the webisode that I expect to be releasing, one of the roles that Asher plays in the community is he goes out pretty much every day, and along with Melchizedek, who is sort of his ward, you might say. So Melchizedek was raised by Asher, and Asher's a monk, and he goes out and kind of takes care of feeds the poor, and kind of that sort of thing. So he's very well embedded amongst the common people. But he also has the king's ear too. Get it? So that's what's going on there. And so the question was, this simple shot of Vespigi chuckling, can we improve it a little bit? What occurred to me is there's really a couple approaches we could take. One is what I did here, which is, let's say we're going to do kind of a traditional pencil test animation and give ourselves a fair amount of ink and paint work to do, obviously, because we got to do pretty much 5 drawings. Well, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I'm going to try to help out people that are trying to get acquainted with Blender as we go. So one thing I'm doing here, and for the record, I'm using Blender 2.81a. Okay, so 2.93. Suffice to say this: if I were to take, and let's just say you're working in Blender and you move some panels around, or you expose some tools in the interface, and I'm not going to explain all the different ways you do that, but assuming you've done that and your working environment is starting to become more comfortable for you, you're liking the way things are laid out, then what you want to do is go to File, Defaults, and save the startup file, and then that becomes the current environment you're working in, and it's what loads up when you first start Blender. So you can preserve your setup. Now, significantly about that, there are a few things to be aware of. Number one, in my experience, when I reload the startup file on a completely different machine and a completely different operating system, everything comes in exactly as expected. Okay, so that's the good news. Number two, if I save this startup file externally, so I just do save as and just save it as a blend file, and then load that into Blender 2.93, again, the entire environment does come in, and 2.93 reproduces the preferred layout and setup of Blend that I have in Blender 2.81a. So the intercompatibility is very, very, very good. One thing you want to bear in mind, though, is this. If you save your startup file, any drawings and animation that you've done in that scene become part of the startup file. So what I tend to do, let me just save my work here, and I'll show you what I tend to do. What I tend to do is, if I'm working along in Blender, and, let me think of an example. Let's say I prefer to have my default view be the palette instead of the layers. Let's just say, okay? And by the way, it's easy to, you could do both, okay? So in other words, let me show you an example of customizing the interface. So in this case, this view here is, you get to it with Shift F7, and if I go up here in the corner and drag, when that little icon turns into sort of a plus sign, I can split this in two, and then I can have both on the screen. So I could actually have the palette and the layers, and that could be my default setup. It's not a horrible way to work. If you were going to take this to extremes in Blender, this is actually what I would do. I'm sorry, that's not what I want to do there. I would actually consider this. Split both the timeline and the the properties panel so that I've got everything at my fingertips, okay? Now, why would I do that? Well, one of the things in Blender is if you hit Control Spacebar, it takes the current view and maximizes it, okay? And you just saw right there, it doesn't, wherever my mouse is, that's what gets maximized, see? So you can set up a fairly complex environment, and the reason I did this is this gives me the ability to have the dope sheet, which is animation keys, just like translation, animation, and stuff like that, is all at my fingertips. And at the same time, I have another timeline open that's the grease pencil keys. So these are all my grease pencil drawings, okay? I find that when you're not in drawing mode, but you're more in animator mode, or you're basically working with your scene data and sort of getting things dialed in, it's often the case that you want to have access to both the standard dope sheet and the grease pencil. Okay, so take my word for it on that. The point is, I could say this is my default setup, with the caveat that when I actually get to work, I'm probably going to hit Control Spacebar and actually be in full screen mode most of the time. And that works out fine because the layers are actually available here. And the palette is available here. It's not quite as ergonomic as one might hope, because if you actually stretch this out like that, you go, okay, well that's simple. Why do I need a panel with my colors if they're all right here? Well, number one, when you close it and then reopen it, you'll see it springs back to its original size. So that's a little bit problematic because you're always having to open it back up or scroll. Number two, all of the tools that are available in the panel for creating new colors and things like that are not actually available in this panel. So this is just a quickie, grab a color kind of mindset, right? But most of the important editability of colors and the ability to select layers and stuff is present in these sort of header, hot buttons, if you will. So anyway, I guess the point of the story is that the interface is highly configurable and flexible. When it comes to customizing hotkeys, Blender destroys Tahoma and Krita both in terms of being able to customize your interface. In Blender, you've got these things called pie menus, where you hit, in the case of the grease pencil, you hit Control Tab and a pie menu comes up where you can toggle between these different modes. Object mode, as you see here, the drawings of Golik and Vespigi are actually two different grease pencil objects. Okay. So now, if I were to animate this, just as an example, I'm not going to save this, what I'm doing here, but let's just say for whatever reason, realistically what you'd really be doing, actually, let's do this smartly. Let's pull out here, and we say what we'd really want to do is animate the camera so we get some sort of like parallax or something. So the way I would do that is I would probably come over to my panel here and hit Shift F9, which switches to the outliner, and I'm going to select the camera, and as you can see, the camera is actually not enabled in the viewport, so I can't see it. So we just turn that on. So Shift F9 is your friend. It gets you back to the outliner and lets you jump around in your scene pretty effectively. Okay, so in practice, what might happen in a shot like this is I'm turning on auto keying, all right, and now I'm going to hit 0, so I'm actually looking through the camera, and I'm just going to hit the G key so that I go. GY means let's go on the y-axis. Now, for most people, looking into your scene is not going to be the y-axis, it's the z-axis. For me, I've chosen to set Blender up a little differently, and I'm not going to get into the nuance of how one might do that. But my point is, if I go forward here, let's just say, we say GY and we move our camera a little bit more. So we're pushing in as the shot goes by, and then I'm going to hit GX, and if I really want to dial it in carefully, I can hit the Shift key, and then I can move my mouse quite a lot, but the actual translation is way under control. And you'll see as I go off screen, it loops around. Oh my goodness, how I wish Tahoma and Krita worked this way. So intuitive, so controllable. Okay, so now what happens, again, hitting Shift so I can dial it in. Now what happens is we've got camera animation. Ostensibly we've got parallax, although there isn't much. And we've also got grease pencil drawing animation. So my point was, in terms of interface, it's very, very often the case that you want to sort of keep these coordinated, right? You want to have access to your dope sheet at the same time that you have access to your grease pencil animation keys. So for that reason, having two dope sheets open tends to be kind of a common, not requirement, because you can actually just click and switch it, right? Switch from one to the other, but it is kind of useful to have the both at the same time. Putting my mouse over this panel, hitting Shift F7, so it turns back to the Properties panel. And there you go. So I'm not going to save this. I'm going to actually reopen it, because for me, right now, all those changes I made, I don't actually need to make in the interface. But getting back to my very original point, which was extremely important and you will find very interesting, is if you're working along in Blender and you find that you do change something in your interface, let's say you want more room on your dope sheet, okay? What I often will do is the minute I see something like that I would want to change, I stop everything, just create a new file, which is for me going to load the startup file, then make the change that I was thinking of, and then go to defaults and then save my startup file. So that's what I do. I clean my slate, then resave the startup file, and that the reason I do it immediately when I think of something I want to change as a default is that, number one, I'm going to forget, and number two, you don't want to have multiple changes or ideas that are baked into an actual scene you're working on, such that it's really laborious to get rid of all the scene-specific data so that you can simply save the startup file. I hope that makes sense. That may not. That may have sounded a little confusing, but anyway. So Goswami's here. Okay, so anyway. Okay, so another tip, another Blender tip is if you're like me, let's go into object mode. So there's multiple ways to get into object mode. If I hit Control Tab, I can use the pie menu to go to object mode. Or I could come up here and click that in the header and switch to object mode. Or, believe it or not, there's yet another way. I could go Shift F9, and by selecting the grease pencil object, let me see here, let's open this up. There's the grease pencil object, and once I open that up, if I grab this, it does go into object mode. Now, let me just double check this, make sure this is behaving as I expect. Yeah, okay. So a little strangeness in that it appears I have to grab the grease pencil object and then click stroke in order to actually get object mode going. Am I reading that right? Let me see. Yeah, see, that's edit mode. And that's object mode. This is kind of interesting. Oh, that makes sense. That actually makes sense. So when I grab this, what doesn't make sense is you would think when I click here that, and we'll call this Vespigi, by the way, that would place me in object mode, and it appears that it doesn't. So this, clicking here and then here seems to put me in object mode. So then if I hit the G key, you see I can move the entire object around. And then if I click here, it goes into edit mode. And now you can access the constituent vertices and things like that for editing purposes or whatever. So again, there's multiple ways to get into object mode. Normally, I just use the pie menu. Object mode, done. Okay, so here was my point. Usually when I start out a scene in Blender, I have some things that are sort of preset. Like I have a layer for shadows, sketch, lines, and fills. Okay, and then in my palette, I've got my charcoal ink, my pencil test color, skin color, kind of gets you started with a character, and then 3 basic fill materials that I can then customize to whatever that character happens to need. So the problem is, if I create a brand spanking new default grease pencil object, I don't get any of that stuff. I have to create a new layer. There is no palette. Okay? Now, if you click here, you can see that it does give you access to all the materials you created earlier, but you don't have all those defaults set up. So you say, well, Dave, then what was your point? Here's what my point was. My point was, once I animated Vespigi and I decided, okay, I don't like it when I wind up with a palette that's 95 items long. Like, this is about right for me. Normally with any given character, between your pencil test, your ink, your shadows, and then maybe 4 or 5 colors, for most characters that's about all you need, right? Sometimes it gets to be more, but even so, you're only taking up, maybe a couple inches of screen space. Okay. So this basic setup works for me. Well, therefore, let's look at this and let's think about the logistics of this. I am not naming my layers based on what they represent in the scene, in the sense of like a head, a hand, a body, blah, blah, blah. My layers are set up, named based on their function in the animation process, okay? That's just a preference. It's certainly not a rule, okay? So, unlike in Krita, for example, we can't create a folder that we pack all these into and then we maybe name that Vespigi and then we have another folder that we name another character or that sort of thing. You don't really have a folder concept. Functionally, you really do, but it isn't expressed as folders. In other words, what I'm saying is these are actually all contained in the grease pencil object, which is this, okay, and this. So, long-winded way of getting around to the point to say that when I went to create Golik, I wanted the same basic setup to start with. If I add a new blank grease pencil object, I'm not going to have that setup. So what do? Well, what I did was I simply went Shift-D to duplicate. So I duplicated Vespigi. And then I went into, well, I didn't even need to go into edit mode, actually. I actually just went into the dope sheet, took the copy, and hit the B key, the box key to box select, and just deleted all of the keyframes. So now I have a grease pencil object that's got all the right layers and all the right colors, but there's no drawing in it. Get it? And that's exactly what I did for Golik. And then I actually moved him back in the 3D space. So G, go, Y on the Y-axis, and I just moved it back like this, and I just put Golik back there because now I've got the ability pretty easily to. And by the way, I just deleted that grease pencil object I created. A way pretty easily to get some parallax in my shot if I want to, because they're actually in different places in 3D space. Get it? Okay. So now, have fun at your meeting, Maria. So if anybody has any Blender specific questions, by the way, since we're kind of in Blender mode today, say the word friends and I'll do my best to answer them. Goswami's probably going to say, should I learn Blender? And I've already answered that question a billion times. And the answer is absolutely. Absolutely, you should learn Blender. You should learn every tool there is out there. But do the hard work we talked about in the past of learning, and you'll prove that you've accomplished this by having something to show, by learning Tahoma and getting one small project done. It could be a 10-second animation, doesn't have to be anything big, but go through that learning process first. Once you've done that, then yeah, if you want to dive into Blender and go down that road, go for it, man. It's all good. And of course you could ignore me. I'm just trying to help, so do what you want. Okay. So now let's get past the sort of software centric ideas, and we're going to go down 2 roads here creatively. One is just the grunt work of ink and paint, and the second one would be yet a third way to approach this shot. Actually, I think what I'll do here, one of the things I also like about with Blender is the infinite canvas. So I'm going to do what I did a moment ago. I'm going to hit Control Shift, I'm sorry, Shift D to duplicate. In other words, this is important. In Blender, if I were to hit Alt D instead of Shift D, it would not make a duplicate. Okay, it would make a clone, which would mean anything that you change in the clone is actually going to be reflected in the original. Okay, so it's an important distinction. That's been true in Blender for 20 years. Alt D makes a clone, Shift D makes an actual new copy. Okay, so in this case, what I'm doing is, let me go through here and name these, just so I'm not kind of driving myself crazy. So this is supposed to be Golek. This is supposed to be Vespigi. And then this is going to be, I'm going to call this, I'll just call this Anime V, meaning anime version of Vespigi, because I want to just kind of play around with a different approach to how I might animate him. So the next step is Control Tab to go into edit mode. Well, I mean, technically I don't need to go into edit mode. There's more than one way to sort of skin the cat here, but what I'm going to do is just hit the B key down here in the dope sheet to select all these keys and delete them because I don't need them. And then I'm going to grab this right here, and if I hit the A key, it'll select all the points, and I'm going to just delete the strokes. And that way the keyframe is still there, but the drawing is gone, right? So now I can redraw. Okay, so Cronus is here. Attica Salsabila DS is here saying wow. And of course, I'm sure Ed Yangaswamy is still here. Okay, so why did I do that? Well, let's look at another thing that you can do. You can do this in Krita as well. You can't really do it in Tahoma, although there is actually a workaround. There's a Kludgy workaround for what we'll call mirroring. Okay, so mirroring means that we're going to add a grease pencil modifier called mirror. Pretty simple. And all that does for us, if we go into draw mode, is creates a mirroring situation so that the character is, well, mirrored. All right, so let me look at my palette, and I was on the wrong color. I should have been here. There's a way, and I knew how to do it in Blender 2.79. Offhand, I don't remember how to do it here, but to actually just move your colors, like if I go like this, Control, and I grab these, you can actually move these strokes to a different color. If you hit the M key, you can move them to a different layer, but you also can actually convert them to a different color. And in Blender 2.8, just because it hasn't come up recently, I don't remember how to do it. So it's a hotkey and it's easy, I just don't remember how, so I'm not going to worry about it right now. But now I'm going to go back to my pencil test color, and then Control Tab, draw mode. And so what we're going to do here is just make a quick sketch of Vespigi, a completely different approach to how we might do the animation on this shot. What I'm thinking is the idea being to adopt a really traditional anime approach. So we're going to do a straight on view of the king, and I'll draw the eyes the way they're going to wind up being, but basically we're going to have this. We're going to have something like that, where his eyes kind of go into this kind of traditional anime thing, and then we might even have, I don't know what the effect would be, but if I wasn't dealing with laughter, but I was dealing with something like annoyance, then of course in anime I might have something like this going on, where they sort of blink on and off. So I'm not sure what the effect would be that I would want here, but basically what I'm thinking is we have a shot of Vespigi where we go ahead and revert to anime style, as it were. Let me zoom out here a little bit. And by the way, I've got I have Blender set up so that with my middle mouse button on my stylus, if I drag it around like this, it pans the screen. That is not the default in Blender. The default in Blender is to would be this when you use your middle mouse button and drag. It's going to rotate the 3D view. Because I'm using it mainly for 2D animation at these days, I have it, I have the hotkeys customized to do panning instead of 3D rotation. So, Not necessarily going to show. It's not. Setting that up and getting it to work is not actually trivial, and so I don't want to just. I don't want to even try to explain it right now because I would really need to look offline, look at what I did, and remember what I did. Because when I got it working, it was quite a few months ago, actually. So let me look at this. Okay, so when you're drawing, when you hit the eraser, let me look at this here. Let me go like this. Okay, there's different kinds of erasers. Like, I like a hard eraser where I can just go like that and it kills the line. That is, again, not the default. The default would be eraser, I think it's eraser soft. So you can try each of these erasers. But what you do is, again, if I recall correctly, it's been working for me for quite a while, and so I don't necessarily always remember exactly what I did to tweak it. But let's just say, if you jump to the eraser and switch it to a certain type of eraser, then when you jump back to the pencil and hit Control, the eraser that gets invoked will be whatever you set as the preference in your eraser type. Now, if somebody knows better and wants to correct me and say I don't have that quite right, feel free to let me know. But as I recall, that was how it worked. So I tend to like a pretty aggressive eraser. What's weirding me out here, though, a little bit is that you see that I'm going like this, and it appears nothing's happening. So that's a little strange. That's really the first kind of buggy behavior I've seen in a while. Eraser point. Let's switch this. Actually, let's just switch to eraser mode. And yes. Why would it? That's weird. Oh, I know why. I'm sorry. I had a stupid attack. Okay, what just happened there? We're in mirror mode. Okay, I forgot we're in mirror mode. What are you talking about, mirror mode? Well, I added the modifier of mirror. Okay, so the reason the eraser wasn't working a minute ago was because I was trying to erase on the side that's the mirror. There are actually no lines over here. All the lines are on the left side. So, sorry about that. So again, if anybody has Blender questions, feel free to smack them out there. So I am going to have a slightly more cartoonish picture of Vespigi. And I think what we'll do is probably his shoulders will kind of come up and then down. Just kind of like this. And that's how that would be animated. And then his head would do the opposite. So when the shoulders come up, the head would come down a little bit. Now, you'll see the mirroring is still going on, even though we don't want it to. So what do you do about that? Let me hit undo a few times, and I'll show you. Okay, once you're happy with the mirrored drawing and you want to start customizing some stuff that's not supposed to be mirrored, then what you do is you just hit apply. But you're going to get an error because you're in drawing mode. So you actually need to jump back to object mode, then apply the grease pencil modifier, then jump back into drawing mode, and you can carry on. And as you can see, the mirroring no longer takes place because I turned off the mirror modifier. Okay? Everything's making sense. All right. So now, an interesting question that might come up for some people is, what if I had showed you guys just a little bit earlier about how extending or splitting the dope sheet into a grease pencil and a dope sheet version is useful because all of your animation keys that are not grease pencil drawing changes are in the regular dope sheet. The only thing in the grease pencil dope sheet is going to be actual drawings. As you can see here, the drawings changing each time. Drawings within the grease pencil object. Well, what if you wanted to do some sort of, and by the way, I should note, be really, really careful to make sure, especially if you have copies like I did here, make sure you've got the right layers selected. It's kind of a perennial problem in all animation software. I would say it's most likely to go wrong in Krita and Blender, whereas Tahoma, it's a little harder to screw this up, I would say. But the idea is just make sure if you're deleting keys or something that you're actually grabbing the correct layer, because if you don't, you're going to be crying when you deleted something. Take 4 or 5 steps downstream and then realize that you deleted something you didn't mean to delete. The easy way to check that is to simply go wherever you think you're trying to be. In this case, let's say here, and just toggle it off and on before you start either dragging around or deleting keys. Okay, so one thing that I don't know if I mentioned, I think I mentioned this yesterday when I was talking about Blender, but one thing you can do in Blender really, really easily that you can basically pretty much not do at all in Krita, and it's kind of clunky to do in Tahoma, is scaling your keys, which means you can change your timing quite easily. So in this case, if I hit the B key and select these, okay, and then I move the cursor to the center point, I can actually hit the S key to scale the keys. Okay, so now we got one little mistake because I didn't mean for this one to be selected. So I'm going to hit Alt-A to deselect everything and then reselect these. Okay, so now I hit the scale key, S, to scale these. Now what that's going to do is it's going to crunch all the keyframes together so all the animation happens faster. If I now just hit the G key, I can also change the overall positioning of that. Okay, so now when I hit playback, okay, so now you might be wondering now why it actually looks slower, and this is kind of an edge case. This is a bit of an edge case. The reason it looks slower is that these keys are only 1 frame apart, and so when I scaled them too much, and what effectively happened was, like, this is a copy of this, and actually this one resolved to the next frame, so it looked like it's, you know, you're trying to make it faster when in fact I made it slower. So the solution in this case would be to go like scale, but only go in 1 step. Are these actually 1 frame apart? Let me check this. Oh, these are 1 frame apart already. So I guess if you wanted to make it any faster, you'd pretty much have to switch to 12 frames per second. I tend to work in 8 frames per second. So for reasons that have to do with both the aesthetics and the volume of work involved in creating a, you know, a long form animated cartoon. Makes sense. So what I was going to mention earlier and never got around to was if you jump into object mode, you say, okay, I break my characters up into their own individual grease pencil objects so that I can then animate them, let's say, right? I can animate their rotation. If we were, like, a good example of why you might do this is maybe this is a character who's walking. Well, if you're doing an anime style, this is the way to make a character walk. Go like that, right? Don't do a walk cycle, just animate this. And then pan the background behind him. If you wanted to make it even more simple, you'd actually go like this. So we hit the S key and scale this guy up a bit. And then we just actually animate this. Up, down, and then pan the background behind them. That's what they do in anime, and it works really well. And for my money, if the editing of the show is well done, it's every bit as effective as a painful Disney-style walk cycle that you're going to do that's going to take you 3 weeks, and you're going to wind up with a result that's not as good as what the Disney guys did, and now you're going to be mad at yourself because you couldn't do as good of a walk cycle. Meanwhile, your friend that likes anime is over here going, well, no, when I do my walk cycle, I'm just going to go like this. And he's done in 10 minutes. Took you 10 weeks, it took him 10 minutes. Who got the better result? Well, you know, you can argue about that. Anyway, my point is, there's more than one way to skin the cat. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to save my work and then demonstrate this. Okay. Within the Vespigi grease pencil object, if I was going to animate him, I might hit the G key, and I'm going to switch to my dope sheet. So you can see an animation key just got created. Okay? Now if I go to the end here, hit the G key on the x-axis, so GX. Okay? And so now here on key 5, I might raise him up a little bit, down a little bit, up a little bit, down a little bit. And by the way, just so you know, there are certainly ways, let me look at what the hockey, yeah, I hit Shift F6. There are certainly ways here in the motion curve editor to create a couple of keyframes and then cause them to loop forever, so you don't have to keep making copies. I'm not going to get into how to do that here today, but just be aware you definitely can do that. Blender has always excelled in that way. But for our purposes, and obviously it doesn't make any sense for him to be chuckling like this while he's supposed to be walking, but as you can see, it's kind of brain dead to go ahead and make this guy kind of move around the screen. Okay. Well, so then you say, well, the reason I'm demonstrating this is the following. The question that might then emerge is, well, what if I have a character, I'm hitting the B key, in a grease pencil object where I've got a couple utility frames, like in the case of Vespigi, a really good example of what I'm talking about right now would be, let's go into draw mode and I'll show you. And by the way, let's turn this off. I want to make a quick correction here. Basically get this back to where I started, more or less. Okay, so he's actually supposed to be framed up about there. Okay, but look at what happens in this shot. Okay, he raises... okay, I've got this animation key. Sorry. X, delete keyframes. Okay. Object mode, move that back to where it's supposed to be. Since this is turned off, automatic keyframing, it didn't set an animation key. Now if I wanted to, I could by hitting I to insert a key, and then there's all these different things that you could set an animation key for, which in this case it would probably be location. Okay? Just trying to cover all the bases here for you folks. Okay, so in this case we've got the guy animating around, and you say, well, what if I actually put his hand on a separate layer completely? Okay, so let's just toy with that and look at what the situation that emerges. What I'm about to show here is kind of important. It's an important thing to know. Okay, so I'm going to do a little quick production here, and then we'll get to what the lesson is. I'm going to grab the charcoal ink, and in the hand layer, I'm going to go ahead and ink his hand. Okay, so I'm going to grab my brush, and I'm just going to do a quick and dirty ink job on his hand. Okay, and for my money, I'm thinking I'm going to take the sketch layer and turn the opacity of it down. So I just want it to be enough to see what I'm doing. Okay, then I jump back to the hand layer and we get this inked, and then I'll show you something important. Okay, and the important thing is, what if I don't want to break my character up into multiple grease pencil objects, but I still want to have some independence between the components in the layers? You know, in other words, what if I want to animate this hand separately from the rest? I don't want to use a bunch of drawings. What do I do? How do I get control of it? Well, here's one way. First of all, similarly to in Krita, you could go and do fill operations here using draw strokes on back, which is what Krita calls behind mode. And okay, stop. I want to turn off the pencil test colors so they're not causing the fill to go haywire. And I also want to turn the thickness of the fill down to maybe 2 pixels. Okay, so now let me go ahead and smack in these other colors. Here we're probably going to have a leak. Yeah, see, that's what I thought. So let's just turn up the leak size. And now that creates a little bit more of a problem that we have to solve, and which I'm going to solve by hitting Control. When I'm in fill mode, I hit Control, and then I actually can just draw some shapes to clean that up. Blender 2.93 certainly has better tools in terms of leak control, and I won't expand on that at the moment, but just suffice to say that if your thing is doing fill operations and fighting with leaks, then you might want to take a look at a higher version than 2.81. Okay, so what I need to do is, let's take away the stroke on these two colors. There's no need for the stroke, I just need the fill. And then let's change the color to match what we're looking for Vespigi. And here what I can do is I can sample this color like that and then make it a little bit lighter. Okay. So with the hand, my point was that you might want to animate it separately from the other layers. Okay. So let me look at something here. Oh, I turned the pencil test off. So let's turn the pencil test back up. I mean the sketch layer. Turn it back up. Okay, so here's what you do. You say, well, okay, normally my general practice is to have my pencil test and my lines and my fills and my shadows all on separate layers, but in this case, I just needed like this utility hand that I could quickly animate over top of my character, and I want to animate it separately. What do? Well, I already did the ink and paint, so the color and everything is baked into this layer. Boom, 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 see? All one layer. So here's what you do. The answer to your question is in adjustments. I'm sorry, not adjustments. That has to do with color and whatnot. It's in relations. Here's what you do. You go into object mode and just add. You can add anything you want. Any object can serve the purpose, but I like to use just a plain axis empty. Okay. So let's bear with me, folks. I'm not sure I see the empty. I think what I'm going to do is redo that. Okay, I want to create the empty way the heck out here just to make sure everything's working the way I expect. Okay. Normally this is stupidly simple. Okay, so there it is. I'm not sure. Yeah, I was just looking around in the interface and I'm not seeing the empty that I created, so that could be a bit of a problem. Alright, so I take this empty and I'm going to line it up. There's a way to make it snap. Let me check something here. Snap. I'm going to snap the cursor to the selected object. Okay, so now the little 3D cursor that jumps around the screen snapped to Vespigi. Okay, because Vespigi is selected. This is important. You're going to be using this a lot in Blender. Shift S. You're going to snap the cursor to the selected, and then you're going to grab the empty and snap the selected to the cursor. That caused the empty to be on the exact same plane as Vespigi. Okay, so now we'll go back to the front view, and I'm going to move the empty down to here. And now I'm going to grab Vespigi and I'm going to take the hand layer and create a relation between the empty and the hand layer. Now I can turn on auto keying, and I could rotate. I want to. Okay, so right now the empty started rotating around the 3D cursor. That's not what we want. I hit the period symbol or the period key, and I want the rotation to be around the median point of the currently selected object. There we go. So now I'm going to move it down. I'm going to rotate it a little bit. And let's go to the camera view so we can sort of see things the way we expect to see them. And one thing that's occurring to me right now is it almost looks like maybe his hand's a little small. By scaling the empty, it actually translates that grease pencil layer as well. Okay? So now all we're doing is rotating the empty. And I'm not going to claim that this animation is going to be perfect, but you get the idea. So now when we run it, we were able to have complete control over the individual layer within the single grease pencil object. And interestingly, if you either break the relation like that or delete the empty, then the grease pencil layer will just snap back to its original position, and you could in fact change your mind and reconnect them, and wango bango, that manipulation of his hand is once again restored. Okay? This is all making sense. Okay, so now let's see what we've got here. Which version? I'm using 2.81. I don't use 2.81 to 8.3 are basically pretty much the same. The big change in 2.82, I believe it was that in the dope sheet and in the timeline, you could no longer just click anywhere to move around. You had to grab the widget at the top. And this is after many, many years of having it be such that you could click anywhere, and I found that rather annoying. So there's a bunch of reasons why, for me, 2.81, specifically 2.81a, just kind of hit the sweet spot. How many kilobits per second is set in your OBS? Offhand, not a clue. Why are you asking? I think notably the OBS video is actually scaled down to broadcast HD, and I probably should change that. I probably should switch it to just doing full HD. So you're not. It isn't your eyes. You're probably getting a little tiny bit of fuzziness in the stream, for sure. So I apologize for that. But so as you can see, that animation for the record is really, really pretty much stupid looking. So let's fix that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the S key to scale these keys and then move them. And what I'm looking for is right at that moment when he's turning. Okay, and now I'm going to hit the B key, grab these two keys and just run them together. And what do we have? Yeah, that works. That works. Cool. So that's pretty quick. We figured out how to control individual grease pencil layers independently of each other in terms of translations, animation, without actually having to separate them out into individual grease pencil objects. So you can do it. So you can think of it. You can think of your organization of your scene as being. Let's grab this. Essentially, you've got layers within grease pencil objects, and then relations give you sort of an extra level of control between those two, if you will. Works pretty well. Works pretty well. So, let's get back to work here. We want to get off the dope sheet, back to the grease pencil. And the question I was asking myself about this drawing over here, and by the way, if I hit the 1 key, I go into front view. I like to draw in front view because I can hit the 9 key and it'll flip to behind. So effectively, you can flip your canvas really easily. It's actually the reason why I have the y-axis going into depth. I have the front, I have Blender set up so that I'm actually up in the sky looking down, you could say. So my up is actually Z, not Y, and my back and forth is X. And the reason I do that is when I hit the 9 key, it flips it. Whereas if you were in the default configuration in Blender and you went into the front view and you flipped it, it would not flip it over, it would turn it upside down. So, don't know if that makes sense for you, but that's actually the reason why I used Blender in a little bit unconventional way in terms of the X, Y, and Z axes. So the question over here was, when Asher makes his comment, would this be just as entertaining if all we did was a close-up of Vespigi chuckling like this, and maybe animate him going from not a smile to a smile? You know, I'm going to run it both ways. So in this case, the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to say, let's shift duplicate, add a key here. Now I'm going to go back here and we're in draw mode. Pencil, you silly thing. So I'm going to erase these. I already made the duplicate, so when I go here, now I'm going to erase these, and I'm going to jump into edit mode. Control tab, edit mode, select his whole head like this. G, Y, which means I'm going to go or move in the Y axis. Hello. I'm sorry, wrong, not Y. Y would be, for me, Y would be depth. This is Y. Sorry about that, my bad. Right after I just told you guys the opposite, right? GX. Okay. So that's what we're trying to animate, and that's it. Now in this case, what I'm saying is, this is the debate. The hotkey to flip is Control 1. No, on your numpad, this has been true with Blender for 20 years. On your numpad, 7 is top view, 1 is front view, 3 is side view. Okay, so for me, I go to front view with the 1 key, but then the 9 key flips it. It takes, I think it takes whatever is the current view and flips it. So if I go to the 3 and then hit 9, yeah, see, it just flips it. So if you're in the front, it switches to back. If you're on the top, it switches to bottom, etc., etc. Make sense? So that's what the 9 key is for. You can do it another way, if I remember correctly. If you hit Control and then the number, yep, Control does the opposite. So if you're in front and you want to switch to back, you hit Control 1 instead of 1. If you're on the top and you want to switch to the bottom, you hit Control 7. But you can accomplish the same thing by hitting 9, which reverses whatever view you happen to be in. So, like I said, that's been consistent in Blender for, decades. That's just how Blender's always worked. So getting back to my work here, the question is, what makes a better shot? Okay, is this the better shot, which requires kind of a lot more work, a lot of drawings there, obviously, or does it turn out, let's see, I'm going to hit Shift F9 so I can grab my camera. I'm going to turn the camera on, go to my 3D view, grab the camera. Sorry, I need to be in object mode. Boom, grab the camera, hit the 0 key, and then I'm going to go ahead and just drag the camera over here, just change the viewpoint. And I actually kind of just made a mistake. Dope sheet. I really didn't want to set a key for that, so I'm going to delete the key and turn off auto keying. I just wanted to move it around, and I'll just move it back later. So now the question is, if I cut this into the show, right, but repeat the keys, obviously, would it actually be just as entertaining? And for this shot, all I need is literally 2 drawings. I actually need 1. I got 1 drawing of Laughing Vespigi that I just distort, raise the shoulders up and the head down, and I really only have 1 drawing. So this shot takes infinitely less time than this shot. And yet my question is this actually indisputably more entertaining? And I'm thinking it really isn't. That's what I'm thinking. So, all right, guys, I'm going to let this roll. You guys can look at it. I'm going to go to front view and take a very short break, couple minutes here. I'll be back in a few. Just a couple minutes. Okay, I am back. What shot is this? Great question, Dead Pianist. Sorry it took so long to answer. This is this shot, and it's an interesting, that's why I'm asking the question I'm asking, is this is the original shot we had in the show. Okay, I'll put the Q key on so it loops. And Vespigi just raises his hand up and chuckles. And I thought, well, so this is after Asher makes a bit of a snarky comment that sort of pokes Golik. Vespigi thinks it's funny. Okay, so my question was, I did the pencil test here last night. I just wanted to improve the drawing a little bit and maybe the motion as well, right? So I thought, okay, that's working okay. Golik's kind of ornery in the background. But is this actually necessarily better than this shot? Okay. Now, we would finish this out by duplicating this key here and then doing the same thing we did before. I'm just going to duplicate these for now to make it simple. Okay, and now if we wanted to really compare them, what we do is we take Golik over here. So we'll go into object mode, grab Golik, hello, object mode. And I guess I have to stop the animation to grab something different. So now I'll take this and hit Shift D to duplicate it and actually strike that. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to assume that we want Golik, no matter which shot we choose, we want Golik to be exactly the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Alt D and make a clone of Golik. So he's in both shots, and in this one he'd be more like this, right? And now any changes I make going forward to this Golik will also update in this Golik. Okay? So it's quite quick and easy for me to compare the two. And I would say in this case, to make this shot play, I would also hit GX and just move Vespigi over a little bit so they're framed up a little better. So my question is, which shot actually works better? Well, you could. My thinking is you could actually have the hand come up like I did in the original version of the shot on this one. Gosh, let's play with that. Let's just try this. Let's just try this. Let's make a duplicate of this as well. Make sure that's going to animate like I expect. Okay, no, that doesn't quite work because of the translation. So I'm going to hit undo. So I guess I won't battle with that. What I was playing around with is just making a complete duplicate of this over here. It's just a tiny bit more complicated. I don't want to fight with it right now. So, but my argument is probably the simple version is actually more entertaining than the ostensibly more sophisticated version of the shot, which would be, of course, let's go into front view, which of course would be this. So one person might argue that the drawing is maybe a little better here or more realistic, but I'm not trying to be realistic, I'm trying to be entertaining. And my sense is that I actually think this works better, which I find kind of ironic. Other people may again disagree, but the reason I find that ironic is that this version of the shot is literally one drawing, and the drawing, you guys sat here and watched me do it, the whole thing took 5 minutes, versus this pencil test, which took probably, gosh, an hour and a half. And I only make that point because this is something I'm always thinking about. When you're trying to create a show that's an hour long, and plus it's got kind of an aesthetic baked into it anyway, you know, kind of an anime-informed kind of show. You can see a little bit in Golik's characterization here. Is if we get too sophisticated, we might actually be harming the show in a way, right? So my personal opinion right now would be probably no contest. I think this is actually what I would probably want to have in the show. This fits the overall tone of the show better anyway. With the small caveat that I might want to amend this first drawing of Vespigi, sorry, we don't want object mode. We want to grab Vespigi and then go into draw mode. All right, and then for my purposes to make things a little cleaner, I'm going to go ahead and in my outliner turn the camera back off so it's not like getting in the way. Okay, so for this shot, what we would probably do is let me go back to Shift F7 here, grab my pencil test, and actually switch back to my pencil as well. So what I would do is I would have the first frame, oh darn it, why did it switch? Doesn't matter. Of Vespigi be more like this, more just kind of looking straight ahead. Arguably this should be in mirror mode again. And then let's just use the sculpting tools to, I'm going to hit the F key to make the sculpt bigger. Okay, so that initially he's not smiling, and then he busts into laughing. I mean that, for me, I don't think there's any contest. I think this is definitely better. And this often happens in the course of creating a cartoon. You find out that the simple solution winds up being more fun to watch. You know, it's just more fun to watch. Now, notably, one thing you could also do here is use your sculpting tools like this. Watch this. 1, 2, and if this was all inked and painted, you could still do this. You could manipulate all of the layers as a single group. So if this was colored in, it would still work. All right, go like this, and now we've actually animated it with just simple. Look at that. Now that's a cool looking shot. That's fun right there. Yeah, for me, it's no contest. So I'm going, okay, all this work trying to be Mr., you know, sort of Disney style artist or whatever the heck you want to call it, was probably, you know, it's not bad. I mean, it looks good, but was it really better from the standpoint of entertainment value? Nope, I don't think so. Again, someone else might disagree, but I just find that. Are you watching Demon Slayer? No, I've heard about that. I've heard about Demon Slayer. No, actually, if you can believe it or not, this week in my free time just for fun, I've been watching Hunter X Hunter, whatever you want to call it. I don't know what the official name of it is, but. So grab Vespigi, go into draw mode. So yeah, I've been watching The Adventures of Gon. Whoopsie, didn't mean to do that. Sorry guys. Okay, important thing to note, make sure you know what frame you're on, that you're on the correct frame. And also, this is an important thing to understand too. I showed you this earlier called draw strokes on back. That's very useful if you're trying to bake all your ink and paint into a single layer. You can do it, not a problem. You do your ink work, and then when you do your fills, you make sure that draw strokes on back is invoked, and that way all your fill operations are under the lines. Okay. In Krita, that becomes a problem because now they're so irrevocably baked together that you really can't edit the lines very well. Completely not true in Blender at all. In Blender, you can still use the sculpting tools to move them around as a single unit, and you also could actually change the thickness of the lines after the fact if you wanted to. Again, both of those operations rather difficult and clunky in Krita or Tahoma compared to Blender. Just saying. But the other thing I wanted to show is this right here called additive drawing. Additive drawing means that if I go to a forward frame here and just start drawing and adding things, it'll just add it to what was already there. Whereas if this is turned off, you'll see what just happened a moment ago where when I started drawing, the drawing that was already there disappears and it creates a completely blank keyframe. So these little icons are quite important to be aware of. Add weight data for new strokes has to do with like rigging stuff, which frankly doesn't work very well with the grease pencil anyway. In other words, you can't add bones and easily distort a grease pencil object reliably the way you might think, like you can do with the plastic tool in Tahoma. But there's a solution, and the solution is you actually parent the grease pencil object to a lattice, which you can then use to do all kinds of manipulations of your character with shape keys. Extremely controllable, works great. And then if you really want to, if you're going down the rigging road, you can then parent the lattice to the armature and create vertex groups on the lattice, and that's how you turn a grease pencil object into a rigged character. I don't usually do it because frankly it's just not worth the work, ostensibly to get some reuse out of your characters. Because remember, the thing you can do in Blender any old time you want to is let's create a new. Now I can go and link. What shot am I working on here? I'm sorry, I lost my place. Let me look on the other screen. So linking and appending are important to understand. So I'm on the video timeline. I'm scrolling to find the shot I was looking for. So forgive me. Here it is. Okay, this is shot number 158. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look in my. Why am I in documents? Stupid thing. Anime, SL, scenes, and what did I say? 158. So let's go to 158, and I'll show you. When you want to reuse stuff, here's how you do it. There's a couple ways. You go 158, and then this is the blend file I was just working on. Well, if I click it, if I double click it, I'm not actually going to load it. What it's going to do is it's going to go into the Blender scene and let me navigate it myself. If I go to, I can't remember if it's grease pencil. These are grease pencil objects, but I don't think that's what I want. What I actually want to do is look at objects, and the object I want looks like the naming. Maybe I didn't save the renamed version, so sorry about that. But if I double click this, okay. So what that did was now this the Spiegel character is linked in from another blend file. Okay, what that means in practice, let me see here. Let me see if I can sculpt this. Okay, I cannot sculpt it. Okay, that's what I thought. So you can draw over top of it with the grease pencil, but you can't change this animation at all. When you link it in, it's protected. So you can use it in your scene, but you can't actually change it. All right? That's actually not what I want to do generally. What I would generally want to do is append it. If I append it, we'll grab this one. Okay, that's the Golic copy. Okay. If I append it, I can go in and change it because I made a local copy. I better double check. Object mode, grab Golic. Let me double check here. Edit mode. Yeah, okay, so you can go in and edit and change it if you append it in. So appending it in makes a local copy of it, whereas linking it just brings it in, but you can't do anything with it. Now, if you changed it in the original file you linked it from, hey, Enio-san, then those changes would propagate. When you reload the Blender file that it's linked in from, the changes would appear. And that's how you could create a character maybe that has a different, you could create a character sheet with a bunch of poses and everything, save it in a blend file, and then reuse that character in all kinds of different scenes. Not a problem. So Inio-san says, hey bro, hey man, good to see you. Goswami, which version you're using and which you used in Tahoma? The Tahoma, I believe, is 1.2 and the Blender is 1.81a. Okay? So coming back to this, I'm going to make the hard decision of saying, you know what? I think I like what I did here better. So I am going to make the bold choice. I'm going to go into object mode, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab these guys. I'm not going to get rid of them, okay? So I'm going to hit the, let's say, control. Actually, let's go to front view. Do I want to do control lasso? That doesn't seem to want to work. Does that? Oh, with the right mouse it does. There's some things about grabbing things with the right mouse versus the left mouse that are different in Blender. Let's say recent versions. Whereas if you go back 20 years, we always selected stuff with the right mouse button, always. And the most recent versions of Blender really do try to, how do I want to say this? They're trying to be more compliant with the way the rest of the world works. So the defaults, of grabbing things with the left mouse button is kind of become standard in Blender. It's just something I've had to get used to. So Goswami says, Blender versus Tahoma, which you like for post-production, like effects and compositing? I like Tahoma too. Tahoma, clearly in Blender, you've got the I forget what the hotkey is, but that's the sequencer. Which one is it? F2. Oh yeah, so it is it's control or Shift F3. Shift F3 gets you to the node editor. The node, I would say this. The issue, Blender versus Tahoma is the same answer I seem to give over and over, which is this. At the end of the day, probably for the most part, Blender is more powerful. But Tahoma is easier to understand. And when it comes to post-production and compositing, it's really not that much of a difference at all. Actually, the schematic in Tahoma for doing effects is very capable. And it's very performant, too. It actually performs really well. And as you see, if you talk about adding effects in Tahoma, you've got blurs, distortions, gradients, color correction, matting, it's all there. Basically, Blender's pretty much the same. I mean, they're different, but not much different. If you look at if you search my YouTube channel for an old video, it's like 10 years old or more, but it's called Green Screen Nightmare. And if you look up Green Screen Nightmare, you're going to see in that video how to do a really deep dive on the Blender node-based compositing to pull an effective green screen shot out of a shot where it should be all but impossible to get a good green screen, a good matte. So, yeah, consider that. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I got to think this through a little bit. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add another empty, pull this over here. Okay, now my question that I have is, how do I get his arm out of this grease pencil object into another one? And the fact is, friends, I have no idea. Probably the simplest solution in this case would be a little non-intuitive, but here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to move Golik here out of the way. I'm going to move Vespigi out of the way as well. But in Vespigi, I'm going to make a duplicate, and then in the duplicate, let's make sure I'm in the right object here. In the duplicate, sorry, didn't mean to do that. I'm going to delete all of these other layers. Now, I don't need to delete them. I mean, I probably could just erase them, just turn them off, basically. Okay. And now I'm going to take the hand, and let's actually, so stay with me here, folks. This is going to make sense in a second. So I'm going to put this empty right here on the elbow where it was before, and then I'm going to take these two objects. So, Control Lasso. Hello? Doesn't seem to want to work. Oh, right mouse. Sorry. Control Lasso. I'm going to move these guys over to the center, kind of where they belong. Okay, it looks like I was wrong, actually, because the camera's over here. So that's fine. We'll move the camera over here. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, again, stay with me, folks. Now what I'm going to do is grab this grease pencil object, and I'm going to parent it to the empty. There it is. Now I can grab the empty, bring it over here. We'll scale it up till it feels right. Okay, so now what we're going to do is, let's say on frame 7, let's turn on the automatic keying. We're going to rotate it up a little bit and hit the G key, go, to move it into place. And now what I'm going to do is go back about 4 frames. Actually, probably should be about 3 if the truth be known. Hit the R key, G to move it. G means go in Blender. And now I've taken this version of it and made it work. There it is. Works perfectly. And if you're not totally satisfied with the sizing of it or whatever, well, that's not a problem, because in this case I probably should turn auto keying off, but what I could do is grab the grease pencil object itself and just scale it down a little bit. I'm going to hit the period key so it's at the median point. Okay, no, strike that. Okay, this is a little more complicated than usual, because the median point for the arm and hand is in fact the median point for the entire grease pencil object. So if I wanted to have the median point be what I want it to be, I would have to delete all these layers, because it's calculating the median point based on all of the drawing that's part of this grease pencil object. If that doesn't make sense, I would say don't worry about it. I already made a copy of it. So over here, since I already made a copy, why do I really need to keep these other layers around, right? So I'm just going to get rid of them. And what we'll probably discover is if we go to scale it now, hit the period key, and we want to center around the median point or the individual origins. Let's do individual origins and see what that does. So grab this, and I'm not sure, I might be bumping into an issue here. I'm not sure why this isn't scaling. Why is it not scaling? And why is it also scaling from out there? Let's try bounding box center. Yeah, everything's seemingly... Wait, what is this out here? So that's the center for that. So I tell you what, let's do it this way. Let's go to the one view, or the front view, so you can see what's going on. Okay, so what I did was I clicked the cursor here. Let's hit Control S, or Shift S, I'm sorry. And let's change I think I've got the wrong hotkey for changing the center. But let's move that selection. Somebody help me out here. What's the hotkey for actually changing the you decide where you want the center point to be? Is it Alt S? No, it's Shift Alt S. It's something like that, or it might be Alt C. I just do not remember. Shift C? Nope, that resets the view. I just don't remember. How do I change? I want to put the center point for this grease pencil object on the cursor, and I just don't remember what the hotkey is. Object set origin. There it is. So I want to set the origin to the 3D cursor. Okay, so now that's interesting. Why in the world? I'm not loving this. It moved the... Okay, so the only way I can make this work, it looks like, is to go into edit mode, select all, and actually just move the grease pencil strokes. Okay, I'll take it. Well, I guess the point is there's always a way, right? Now if I hit... What's really vexing me here today, though, is that it appears to be locked. The rotation and scaling and everything seems to be locked, even though I made it as an independent copy. Or did I clone it? What if we scale this up, it doesn't seem to make any difference. So I'm a little bit vexed on this one, but that's okay. Again, there's always a way. One thing I can do is grab the here's what I'll do. I'm going to grab the empty, I'm going to scale it up a little bit. And yeah, let me see. Is there something weird going on in 3D space here that I'm not aware of? No? So, I know I look like a complete and total fool, but you see how the translation now is like an offset from the empty? And that's because I changed the origin point. So I'm going to actually hit undo a zillion times and see if I can actually get things back to... Yeah, let's just kind of get things back to normal. So I'm going to try a completely different approach. And my new approach is going to be to grab the empty, make sure auto keying is off. Now let's take a look at this. And I said maybe his hand was a little too large. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the S key to scale the empty down a little bit. But if I animate, you're going to see it's going to jump back because I have auto keying turned off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it down a little bit, and then I'm going to hit the I key on the 0 frame, by the way. So I really need to do it here. And I'm going to hit the I key and hit a scaling, insert a scaling key specifically. Now, unless it set keys on every single parameter in auto keying mode, it did. Okay, you can see the hand growing. So how do we fix that? Okay, great. Let's find out. Let's go into the graph editor, and what we're going to do is we've got the empty, and we're going to look at the scale, Z scale, Y scale. Okay, and you can see that the changes are very, very small. So this is going to be a little tricky. But I think this is what we're looking for. So this is the key I just set when I shrunk it down a little bit, but then it grows back because this key was set earlier. Okay? Now, let's do this. Let's split the screen and hit Shift F5 so we can see what we're doing over here in the 3D view. And let me just see if this is what I think it is. See that? See it growing? See it growing? Okay. So that's what this key is. So I think, pretty sure, friends, if I grab this key right there, delete that, and delete that keyframe as well, actually all three of those. That's the Y scale. So yeah, unfortunately it set a bunch of... This is the danger with auto keying in any program. If you do auto keying, you run the risk of, you know, it's going to set, it doesn't know what you want, right? It has no idea what you want to do, so it's going to set keys. But as you can see now, it's not changing size, right? So that's what I wanted. So now if I were to take this to extremes and shrink it way down, you'll see that this, well, now the size changed again. Oh, I didn't set the key, my bad. Size it, I key to insert a key for scaling, and now it's permanently that size. Get it? Okay? So all we're doing is we're scaling the empty. And then I key, if you really want to control your keyframes, this is how you do it. You hit the I key, and now if I want to, I can go ahead and drag this like this to actually close up the interface and get rid of that extra window I created a moment ago. Okay. Set origin to object doesn't work well with grease pencil objects. That would seem to be the case. Control period, you can drag the origin to where... Oh, control period. That's interesting. I better save my work just to be safe. Let me look at that. So, control... You can use the auto key and change the option from timeline's keying menu. I'm sure you can. That's the thing, and Dead Pianist is making a good point. That's the thing about Blender is whatever you want to do, I'll guarantee you can do it. You just have to know how, and that's part of the Blender learning curve. Blender is like what I want 2D software Blender can do. I want post-production software Blender can do it. And also default is good, but not great. Yep, you can use Maya in making something, so you can't make anything in Blender. Don't get wrong, Blender's powerful. Yeah, I would defy anyone to show me something that they can do in Maya these days that you can't also do in Blender. which has been true for at least 10 years, actually. You know. Now there may be things, but geez, and now with Blender 3, with like geometry nodes and stuff, now Blender has entered the type of, it's entered Houdini zone, basically. With geometry nodes, Blender has become like Houdini, where everything's procedural, everything's animatable, including the creation of stuff. So it's like, yeah, Blender 3 pretty much puts the debate to rest. But like I said, guys, I'm liking what I see here. Now all I have to do is ink and paint on basically 2 drawings, and then just animate them, and I've got my shot happening. So let's see what this looks like rendered. Okay, it's got the white background, so I think we can copy this into the show. I feel pretty comfortable doing so. So this is going to be shot number 158. So how do we do that? Well, we go over here, and what we're doing is we're going to save this. We're going to render to 158. So let's go to the L, Anime, Salt and Light, Scenes, 158, render. And they are pings. Oh, that's the wrong shot, friends. Oh, I'm in one. How did I get into 170B? I guess my eyes aren't quite what they used to be. 158. Oh, I see. The numbers are under, not over. Sorry, that was stupid. So the file names are underneath the icons, not over the icons. So that's how I did that. Okay, so we're in render mode. We're going to render pings. Let's accept that. We want pings, RGBA. The alpha might actually cause it not to look right because it's going to not have the solid background. So for now, I'm going to actually call it RGB and go ahead and render this and see if it goes ahead and updates in the show the way I expect. So Blender is very good. I like it for editing and 2D, 3D hybrid effects. Yeah, I've never used Houdini. I've been aware of it for 20 years, but you know, back in the day it was so expensive, you know. And it looks to me like we have a problem. Okay, so are these JPEGs? That doesn't really make sense. 150. Oh, I know what the problem is. Blender. Okay, yeah, I made a stupid mistake here. That's interesting that you can open that up and actually cover the tabs. Not sure how useful it is, because if you covered it and you didn't know what you had just done, and look at that, actually look at what just happened. Now I can't get it back, so that's really not good. And undo doesn't help. So believe it or not, I hope I saved my work, because if I want to get my tabs back, anybody know the answer here? Oh, there it is. It's this little widget right there. Oh my gosh, who would ever know that? Wow. Okay, so it stored the output in temp. Why did it not store the location as expected? That is a little strange. 158, render. Okay, let me just think about this for half a second. Oh, okay. 001.ping. Okay. So our file name, I think we want to put that here, 158 period. Now, past versions of Blender would change this to an underscore. And it did. So this is as far as I'm concerned, it's a bug in Blender, but you have to change the underscore manually to a period if you want to have a number followed by a dot followed by 4 digits. Just something to be aware of, friends. So now I suspect this is going to work. And we'll find out here in a moment. Okay, Houdini's the... I don't know what that acronym means. Resolve. Yeah, if you've had good luck with Resolve, congratulations. I've had terrible luck with Resolve over the years. Which, for those who don't know, DaVinci Resolve is really the complete. Animate with MIDI devices. Now that's an interesting idea. Frankly, if I was going to try to implement software to do that, I would actually do it in the browser. Because if you take a JavaScript library like GSAP, also known as GreenSock, and you combine that with web-based MIDI control, which is already present certainly in all the Chrome flavors of the browser, you could do some really interesting things with MIDI controllers. Frankly, if I was going to develop my own animation software, that's what I would be doing. I would make it cloud-based and be putting it, you know, on the cloud. I'm glad you've had good result with Resolve, guys. You know, and I probably should try it again. It's been a while. Okay, looks to me like we got a little bit of an editing thing here. We need to start this earlier. Not bad. I mean, I think, you know, to a degree the to a degree the laughter, the shoulder movement is a little too extreme. So I probably should tone that down a little bit. But I think in terms of signal flow of what I'm seeing on the screen, I'm like, you know, I actually think this is working. I prefer this. There's a little more levity baked into it. It's a little simpler. And it's preserving the aesthetic of my show a little better. I was really, because I've been doing so much pencil test animation lately, honestly, it's not that I love it. I think it's great, but I'm at risk of changing the feel of the show too much and giving myself a ton of work to do for not necessarily any good reason. So let's jump back to Blender. Chops, yes, chops, right, channel operators. Well, like I said, essentially that's what you're getting in Blender with the geometry nodes. And I assume basically everything's animatable. I showed in another video, I don't remember when I showed it, but I'll say this again for if you're wanting to marry your grease pencil animation with perhaps assets that you created in a different program, as I have often done in Krita or Tahoma. Okay, the solution to that is to bring in images as planes. And so the question that would emerge is, well, if you have an image sequence, how do you retime it and things like that, and tell Blender what image to show on what frames and when to advance to the next frame? The default obviously being, if you have an image sequence, it'll just play it back in sequence, right? But if you have a character in an image sequence with an alpha channel and you want to either do some deformations or you wanted to retime it, then that's a little more complicated. So if anybody has an interest in how you would do that, I can show you. If nobody cares, then I won't bother with it. Wait a second. What would be expected? Oh yeah, I guess Swami having trouble with Resolve. Yeah, absolutely. It crashes for me all the time too, and I have a very powerful computer. So, Amar is saying, how long have you used editing software? And I don't know. I think he's talking to Goswami. You know, in my case, of course, it's been about 20 years. Okay, so I would say I'm pretty happy with this, and I'm not sure if I want to bother with ink and paint at the moment. I've been going almost 2 hours, and I think it's been pretty packed with Blender information, that's for sure. So as far as those who are interested in what you can do with Blender, think this has been a good session. If I was going to go ahead and ink this, we'll just play with it. I'm going to select Vespigi, and then I'm probably going to go to the lines layer. Actually, what I would likely do in my case is I would hit Control Tab, so I go into draw mode, and then I'm probably going to turn the sketch layer down so I can barely see it. However, another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add back in a mirror modifier so that when I go to ink it, I can get mirroring going on. Okay, so then I would go, and so let me see here. Let's turn this up so I can just barely see it. And now what we're going to do is go into lines. We would switch from a pencil to our ink pen, and we would switch from our pencil test red to our charcoal ink. That's pretty much it. Now, one thing you'll notice with the ink pen, see how it sort of follows my cursor around the screen? See the smoothing that's baked into it? You can feel that, right? Okay. That's because of active smoothing. Now you can turn that down, and now you can see it's way more responsive. And if you but if you want smoothing, like if I zoom way in here, you might, I guess not too bad, but sometimes you can see like noise in the strokes. And you can mitigate that by using post-processing smoothing. So if I turn this up to 1-ish, what'll happen is after I finish the stroke, you'll see it sort of snap into a little bit of smoothing. And if you add multiple iterations of it, you can see there's quite a lot of smoothing going on. So pick your poison. There's post-processing smoothing. There's active smoothing. Again, quite good. Or there's another way, which is if you turn all the active smoothing off at any point in time, you can hit the shift key and the stabilizer will turn on. And the key with the stabilizer is if you want to finish your line, let your finger up off of the shift key before you lift your stylus. If you lift your stylus first, the line doesn't finish, and if you lift your stylus after lifting your finger, then the line does finish. So there you go. You got 3 different ways to do smoothing. For me, when I'm doing inking, actually I find the active smoothing to be pretty good. So that's what I'm going to do. All right, and on this key, I am going to just kind of get some ink lines in there. And I'm kind of doing this in such a way that I'm assuming I'm probably going to be using the sculpting tools to animate the move from a more serious demeanor. Sorry, this really needs to be more like that. From a more serious demeanor to the chuckling kind of thing. All right. Okay, stop. Let's go ahead and go out from there. That's okay. That's not too bad. In the prior drawings, I'm looking at the chat real quick. Yes. Thank you, Sifter. Yeah. Sifter makes another great point. If you don't like the active smoothing, you want to do it more selectively, what you might do is go ahead and draw your lines and then go into sculpt mode. But in sculpt mode, instead of doing the grab mode, which moves it around like this, hit shift spacebar and switch it to smooth mode, and then you actually can selectively smooth your grease pencil lines with total control on a stroke by stroke basis. So there's 4 different ways 4 different ways that you can deal with smoothing in Blender. All the tools are there. So hence, as some of you have noticed, I am a bit bullish on Blender at the moment. A bit bullish on Blender. Well, it's understandable. I've been working with Blender way longer than any other animation software. And started working with Blender in 1999. And boy, was I a guru. I was a guru on the message boards. I remember, oh God, what was his name? I remember a young animator named Stefan Ahonen who was active on the boards back then. And he was so talented. He really came up with some innovative things you could do in Blender back in the 2.2 version days. And then there was another guy, what was his name? I worked with him on the Blender, when we did the Blender Tutorial Guide Volume 2. I forget his name, but this guy was really active on the board, and like people would have a technical question or something, and he would be the guy that would be answering their questions, you know, like more often than not kind of thing. And I can't remember his name. He went by the handle Iceman. He was Iceman, and Iceman was, he was one of these guys. I liked Iceman because he was heartless. If somebody asked a stupid question, he'd be the guy that would answer it in such a way to let them know this is a very stupid question, right? You need to read the docs, and you know what I mean. He was that guy. But he was quite a talented animator too. Okay, so now I'm going to actually do the smoothing thing. So I'm going to hit Control Tab, Sculpt Mode, Shift Spacebar, Smooth, and then just smooth this stroke out. Now my strength here is kind of lame, so I'm going to crank that up and turn pressure off. Well, wait, no, I turn pressure off. It doesn't seem to be affecting it as much as one might hope. But it is smoothing it out. So there we go. There we go. Okay, I made a critical error, as you guys can see, in that I kind of confused Blender. Strike that. That's not true. The mirroring is working, but the mirroring stops working in sculpt mode. Now, can you change that? I think you can, actually. If you go into your modifiers and click this little button here, it causes the modifier to display in edit mode as well as in draw mode. So there you go. If you're frustrated because every time you go to sculpt your mirroring turns off, well, there's your answer, friends. Grab. So yeah, I'm just making some little bitty changes. And I'm going to turn pressure on my strength. Yeah, that lets me kind of dial it in a little better. That's interesting. Oh, that's very interesting. Why is that working in reverse? I think I've got something. Grab mode. Something seems to be inverted. So I guess it turns out I'm still learning as I go, friends. I'm still picking up new things. All right, let's go to this frame. We're going to draw in additive mode, so that when we start making modifications, we're not going to erase the keyframe. But actually, okay, so there's a little strategy involved here. What I really should do is get this painted first, because if I get it painted, I can use the sculpting tools to animate the smile. That'll take 5 seconds. And then on the next frame, all we have to do is change his eyes, and then it's just a matter of animating him. So it's a lot easier to join your drawings in Blender 3 as well. That may be, I don't know. That was, if you mean taking a Blender grease pencil layer, for example, and moving it into another grease pencil object or something like that, That was actually doable even going back to grease pencil in Blender 2.79, but it was just one of those arcane little methodologies that most people don't know. But I mean, but you could do it. It was, I remember kind of doing the deep dive and figuring out a way to do more with the Blender grease pencil in 2.79 than most people thought was possible, actually. It was always possible. It was just not super obvious how to do things. Sure. The biggest deficiency of 2.79 being that you could only have one grease pencil object in your scene. Okay. So yeah, it would not make any sense to not color this first. And we will make our life a little easier by putting the fills and the lines on separate layers. You could put them on the same layer, but I'm not going to, because what I want to be able to do later is make sculpting changes to the lines. And as you can see here, if you pay really close attention, you'll see that there's an option called auto lock inactive layers, where whatever layer I'm on, if I were to sculpt this, it would not affect the other layers. Now you can turn this off so that they all act as a single unit. You do it, you know, whatever it is you need, that's what you can do. So, okay. So how would we approach this? Well, let's go to our palette. We've got these colors for his clothing, frankly. So what I'm going to do is I need to come up with Vespucci's hair. We've kind of got a skin color we can customize for him. We need a whites of the eyes. So mainly it's the gold of his crown and the hair is what we need. So here's how you do it. Add a material, but now I did not just add a material. This is important to understand. When you hit the plus key, you're not adding a material. You're adding a slot in the collection of materials. So now you have to tell it what material you want to have be in that slot. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new material, or you just start from scratch and roll your own, or what I often will do is I will go click here and just pick a material that's kind of similar to what I want. Like this one has no stroke, it's only a fill. That's pretty much what I wanted. So this is material. So now what it did was these two are pointing. This is super important to understand, you guys, so pay attention here. These are pointing to the same material. If I change one of them, the other will update as well. You go, well, that's stupid. When would I ever want that to happen? And you know what? There are use cases. But what you do is, after you create the copy, you click this little icon here to create a new material. And now what it did was it makes a copy. And now this becomes his hair. As you can see, we're going to change the color. Probably more like that, actually. And now I'm going to run the whole process again because I need to create the gold for his crown. So I'm going to go plus, grab the hair color, but then click this to make a duplicate and then change the color. So there's a couple hoops you got to jump through. If you're wondering if you can sample another material in some way, you can. If you wanted to change this color, you could actually go here, grab the eyedropper, and sample anything in your scene. So one thing you could do is bring an image in from another shot in the show to act as a color key, and then by just using the eyedropper, I could sample the colors from that and fill up the colors in my palette for coloring purposes. Okay? Making sense, friends? Now, this is where, to a degree, one could argue that having two columns here, one for the layers and one for the colors, might be useful. You can debate that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just go ahead and select the fill layer and then figure that basically I'm not going to be switching layers. I'm going to be putting all of the color in the fill layer, so there's no reason necessarily to switchy poo. Now I'm going to grab my fill tool and see how things go. And oops, we got a problem. So now the question I have is it the case that if these other layers are locked, that the fill operation will not observe the lines for the purpose of knowing where to stop. So I'm going to unlock everything and see what happens. That still didn't work. So I'm not sure what's going on. If I go to the lines, so I'm going to do a little testing here. I'm going to do this on the lines layer and see what that does. And it still fills everything. So something is going wrong here. Whereby, am I in the wrong object? I mean, I don't think it's a leak problem. If I draw a oh, I see what the problem is. Okay. Guys, this is really, really, really important to understand. It's a wrinkle that probably would escape you unless you realize what had happened. What's going on here? This is kind of interesting. If we turn off the mirror effect, okay, so we just turn it off in the interface, what we discover is that most of our shapes are not in fact closed. Okay? And so now I've got a little bit of a Blender question here. If I bake in the mirroring at this point, I'm kind of shooting myself in the foot because the drawings are going to be changed to change his expression, and I wanted that to be mirrored as well. So what I really need to do, this is a great example of you really need to do the right things in the right order. So let's back up a little bit. Let's back up a couple steps. Let's go into draw mode. And let's go back into our lines layer. And most of this is going to be done with sculpting, but I do need to change one drawing. So this drawing right here, when his expression changes to the smiley laughing face, the only thing we actually need to change here really is his eyes. Okay? So I'm going to do that. We're going to stay in mirrored mode, and we're in draw mode. I believe I want to make sure I've got the right material selected. Charcoal ink. We don't want the fill tool. So, and all we're going to do is just erase his eye, which should get rid of both of them. We're going to, okay, stop. We're in the lines layer. Oh, this is probably on this side. Yep. Okay. There's another feature here. I'm going to hit undo a couple times and show you guys something. There's another feature that you really want to be aware of. In your materials, you can do the same thing in your materials that you can do with your layers, which is you can lock unselected. Now when I erase, it's only going to erase my lines. Okay. Let me do that again. Let's lock all. Let's go to charcoal ink, and then let's unlock. That's kind of strange. Why is that set to pencil test? I've selected the, I'm having to, let's do it this way. Let's unlock all. Let's select charcoal ink, and then let's go lock unselected. And as you can see, what it's doing is this appears to be a bug to me. Well, we can do this manually. I'll unlock charcoal ink and lock the pencil test. But so anyway, the point is that now if I erase, the pencil lines don't get erased. Just the just the ink lines. And then the other thing I can do here is go into sculpt mode, and I could sculpt this if I want to. You wouldn't have to. I mean, you could just redraw it, but if I sculpt it, it actually gives me the option of creating animation keyframes to get from one pose to the other. So that may prove to be useful. Probably not, since we're changing the way we draw the eyes anyway, but just something I'm thinking about. So now I'm going to go back into draw mode, and what we want to do is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then we'll kind of put a little bit of a crow's feet and smiley face and maybe a little more wrinkle action, because frankly in the previous drawing he really should have probably a little bit more indication of age. So okay, so again, in terms of doing the right things in the right order, why? Oh, the onion skins. We're seeing the onion skins here. This is one reason why I'm not a big fan of onion skins. Like right now, they're kind of cluttering up the works here. So, in your overlays, you can turn off the onion skins. That's what I do. Okay. So now, what are we going to do? Well, let's turn the sketch. So it's clear to me that what we probably want to do, this is one of those things you have to just decide. Like, I want to animate the face while it's still in mirrored mode, but at the same time, I really want to color it first so that when I animate the face, all the colors and lines move together and, you know, as a single unit. So you have to kind of pick. Are you going to bake down your mirroring? Or are you going to do your animation first? So yeah, it's just really a choice. In this case, the fill operations are going to be... Let me think about this. See, I could do the fill operations as... Well, how to put this? I could cheat. Okay. The way I would cheat is like this. If I really want to cheat the materials, what I would do is I would actually draw... Well, actually strike that. What I'm doing is I'm basically guaranteeing that I have closed shapes. So by putting that in mirror mode, and it's being laid in the fill layer, now if I hit the F key, I'm sorry, not the F key. The F key doesn't, in Blender, the fill tool is not the F key. Okay, so now it works. The problem is that it's also respecting the sketch lines. So for filling purposes, I really need to turn the sketch lines off, and it looks like we're in pretty good shape. Okay, now this one I think is going to fill anyway, and then we can go in and I can hit the control key when I'm using the fill tool to actually draw closed shapes. In this case, what we need to do is close that, whoopsie poo. So we've got a leak somewhere. Yeah, probably down here. So I'm going to go ahead and oh man. Oh, I'm sorry. I need to cheat again. So I need to go like this. I need to cover the... I have to close the shape from the center. See? Because I have to trick the mirror tool into thinking that we have closed shapes when we don't. I hope that makes sense, guys. Because if we were to turn the mirror tool off, you would see that actually these are all wide open shapes. And wide open shapes, in case you haven't noticed, don't tend to fill very well. Okay. Now, we're going to keep cheating by grabbing this material and actually drawing a shape right here so that then the crown will fill. And as you can see, it's kind of creating a fair amount of garbage in terms of the fills. Not exactly gorgeous. Okay, if we turn this on, well actually it looks like it is turned on. Draw strokes on back. That will allow us to go like this. Okay, unless it doesn't work. Oh, it's again because of the mirroring. So we're really having to dance around the mirroring issue here. So, not a big deal. Like I said, it's just one of those choices you have to make how you want to approach the thing. Okay, another point to be made is that the color on his hair is a little too dark. So let's lighten it up so we can see it, and then let's tamp down the saturation. More like that, I would say. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and unlock all these colors so I can just grab them and use them. Okay, so same situation here, we have to trick it. So we trick it like this. And the only reason we're doing this is so that we can then have the ability to sculpt in mirror mode. Keep using mirror mode for the animation keyframes. So I want everything to be baked together, as it were. Okay, so I'm going to turn off draw behind so that I can actually make this little correction right here. And one thing I wish Blender had, which I'm pretty sure it doesn't, that you have in Tahoma, is the ability to sample a color that's on the screen and have it select the correct material from the list. That would actually be quite a nice little addition with Blender. So a little bit of touch up here. And I'm thinking probably, nope, that didn't quite work. This is obnoxious, but I have to turn mirroring off. Yes, okay, so you can see, I like an idiot, I drew his eyebrow in this side, so. Sorry. So now that should work. Yeah, and look, now that's interesting. Why did one side fill but the other didn't? So you can see that, let's just say that mirror mode does have some quirks to it that you might find yourself having to work around to some degree. Why this is not filling here is absolutely a mystery to me. We're not in draw behind mode. What happens here? And now it seems to want to not draw the shape at all. So that's a bit strange. It could turn out that the whole thing of sort of doing battle with mirroring mode for the purpose of doing fills is just not worth it. And of course the alternative approach is to just have to do ink and paint on every single animated frame. One of those trade-offs. But this is weird. What I'm seeing here is weird. Because it is not in draw strokes in back mode. So if I draw a stroke anywhere, okay, I would hardly call that mirroring. So it appears that the mirroring tool, once you get into doing fills and stuff, it appears to me that the mirror modifier is a little buggy. So I'm going to say, since we have this pose and this pose, I'm going to say let's apply it and forget it. Oh yeah, we need to be in object mode. Let's just forget fighting with the mirror tool. So apply it. And so now the mirroring is baked in. And in point of fact, if you notice here, on the fills layer, we actually could delete this keyframe because the coloring is going to be the same throughout the whole thing. Okay. Now we do have the problem, as you can see, that the hand is falling behind. And so we might have to create an offset for that. Right? So it actually shows, it needs to be a little bit forward. No big deal. We'll get to it. Okay, so what's next? Well, what's next is going to be this material, which is his garment. And we're going to go into draw mode. And we are going to turn on the feature that causes us to draw behind, so that we can then just go like this. And I apologize. What just happened? Classic problem, classic mistake. I was on the wrong frame. We'll try it a little bit different way this time. We'll actually just draw the shape like this, so that then hopefully these areas will fill. But see, that leak size situation is way unacceptable. So I'm going to turn the leak size down to like 1 pixel. There we go. That's what we're talking about. So now, having done that, I can go Control, Lasso, Control, Lasso. And so those who are purists are going to be complaining right now. You're having a cow because you're going, man, look how bad that looks. And you're right. You're right. It's a little rough. It's less than stellar. But then again, it's also about 1 minute of sort of cleanup work. So no big deal. I'll actually cover that with the beard. Is that evil of me? I think it is. I think that is evil. You could also clean these up by clicking this again so that you can then just draw a lasso and it's just going to fill in all the spaces, right? So probably really the easier way to do it. If the truth be known, I need to assign a hotkey to the draw behind thing. That would be a useful. Okay, so up here we have additional problems. And that's pretty typical when you get into really small body parts. It's pretty common, no matter what your software is, to have to hand paint it a little bit. So there we go. We need to give him some whites of the eyes, by the way. So let's add a slot based on the gold material, create a duplicate, and then make it essentially white. So let's sample the gray from somewhere. There's gray. Sorry, my bad. I didn't create a duplicate. Boom. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is sample some gray so that I can then push it up close to white. And that will be the whites of his eyes. Okay. Now we just draw this little shape. And we draw this little shape. And then we go forward to this key. And here we will... Oh, come on, stop. Undo. Okay, stop everything for half a second here. We want additive. Sorry, my bad. We want to be in additive drawing mode so that when we draw, we're not actually destroying the entire frame, but we're just adding to it. So all I'm doing is painting out everything else so that I can go in and probably, boy, that sure is sloppy. This is where I mean, again, with small body parts, it's not unusual to have to hand paint them, but at the same time, I think you'll discover that the fill tools in Blender 2.9, specifically 2.93, and then certainly version 3, is probably a little less clunky. As I recall, probably the clunkiest thing in 2.81 is the fill operations. But it's, you can still work with it, right? So save this. Okay, so now what we need to do is grab our shadow and go into our shadows layer. And this should be just a single keyframe on one. Okay? This is where the mirroring would really help, but it is what it is. So I'm going to go ahead and we're just going to do it by hand and trust that it's going to turn out okie dokie. I would note that the way the shadows work is, how do I put this? Let me think about how to say this. Probably by demonstrating it would be the easiest. Okay. If I draw a shadow and then I draw another shape, the density of the shadow piles up on itself. You would think that if the shadow material was not transparent at all, so we turn the alpha up to make them black, but then we lower the opacity at the layer level, you would expect that to mitigate that problem. Okay, whoops. Let's find out. And it doesn't. So this is a bit of a strange thing with Blender 2.81 that I'm pretty sure is fixed in Blender 2.9. Is that if you're going to do shadows this way, you pretty much need to plan ahead and make sure you don't overlap your lines unless you really intended to. So just one of those things. Now in this case, you can use it to your advantage. Like right here, I might say, well, I want another layer of shadowing, right? So, you know, pick your poison. It's actually, is it a disadvantage or an advantage? Is it a bug or a feature? Well, it's both. It's actually both. So, all right, let's zoom out here a little bit. Okay, so now why did we do it this way? Well, this now allows me to use sculpting to dial the animation in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the sketch layer. I'm going to turn the sketch layer back up and then move it. Well, I guess it is actually at the top of the stack. I forgot. In 2.81, the layers that are higher in the stack show on top. With Blender 2.79, it was the opposite. You would think of it as dropping your layers down into down into the pipe, and so whatever lands at the bottom is actually showing in front. So I think the way they're doing it now, in the 2.8 series really is the right way. It's definitely more intuitive. So let's go forward to frame right here, and what we want to do is we want to lock the sketch layer so that we're not changing anything in the sketch drawings, and we don't want auto lock inactive layers turned on, because what we're going to do now is we're going to sculpt the shadow, the lines and the fills all together. Meaning, Control Tab, go into sculpt mode, grab mode, and then we're going to just zoom in here, and what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and follow the sketch. As you can see, I'm going to actually turn off the pressure on that. Yeah, it's a little easier to control for what I'm doing now. So as you can see, all the layers can be manipulated as a common unit, so to speak. Okay. It appears to me that what I did here, this is where I really should probably turn the sketch back down again. I just need it up enough to be able to see what I'm doing. Oops. So, and I guess technically it doesn't matter which layer I'm in because all of the layers are being affected by the sculpting tool. Okay, let's turn it off. Let's keep going forward. Okay, and I can see a problem that we're going to have that I just hadn't thought about earlier, which is, excuse me, which is that the entire drawing is going to be correct right up, well, okay, when we get to the frame where his eyes changed, we're going to have a way to cut everything except his eyes into that frame. If you're not following what I'm talking about, we're going to bump into it headlong here in just a minute. So we're going to bump into the problem, and you'll see what the heck I'm talking about. What the heck is he talking about? Well, you'll see here shortly. Okay. And I believe, boom. Okay, obviously we haven't animated the positions yet, so let me just think about this for half a second. So the problem that we have is that we've got the correct eyes, but the wrong everything else. Make sense? So as he animates like this, and that's not the most wonderful eye animation there in the world, but it all goes by pretty quick. So the question is, what do we do here? Well, the simple solution is to auto-lock inactive layers, Okay. Here's what I'm going to do. Watch this. I'm going to go into edit mode, and I'm going to grab the eyes. Now I'm going to go L key for select linked, and I'm going to hit Control C. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this let's unlock everything. And I don't know if I'm necessarily doing this in the most intelligent ordering, but I think this is probably what we want. Okay, so right here in the lines layer, we're going to have to grab and I think I am going to auto lock inactive layers so that I can just grab his eyes like this. Again, hit L key to select linked, and then we're going to delete those strokes out, and then we're going to paste the other ones back in. Okay, so that took care of the strokes. Now we need to go to the fills layer and just grab the whites of the eyes, hit the L key, and then delete them. Delete those strokes. So now we solved our problem. Okay, except stop everything. Stop everything. There's a problem. And the problem is by doing that cut and paste, or that cut of the color, what we modified was actually the previous frame. So the solution is to hit Shift D, duplicate that frame, and then we want to modify this one. Okay. It looks to me like curse it all. We did the same thing in the lines. Darn it. Yeah. This is that moment where Dave is inclined to curse. Okay. So here, it's probably just as well, actually, if the truth be known. So this is actually another thing. I think with Blender, it would be useful if there was like an immediate mirror mode for drawing, as opposed to having to apply the modifier. Now, if we actually re-add the modifier here, I think that we'll get the result we're after. So I'm going to go ahead and go into draw mode. And, oh, come on, darn it. Draw, not fill. And wrong color. So there we go. Yep, and as you can see, it mirrors it. So I'm going to jump to the previous keyframe. I don't necessarily like those lines the way I did them. That's a little better. Okay, so now I'm a little additionally confused. Yes. Okay, I'm a little confused here. It looks like what I did was when I added the lines of his eyes, just because I wasn't paying attention or for whatever reason, I deleted all the other lines. Okay, well that is once again easy to fix. Okay, I'm going to hit Control X. No, I'm going to hit Control C. I'm going to delete those strokes. And now the mirroring. Now I'm getting a bug with the mirroring. Oh, it's because I'm in edit mode. Got it. Okay. So what I want to do... Yes. Okay. So now what I want to do is get rid of this keyframe and make a duplicate. And select linked. X, get rid of the strokes, and then Control V. And then in this case, I think I'm going to hit the G key on the Z axis and raise those up a little bit, like that. Okay, I think we got it. So as I said, there's always a way. And now we just have to animate his head and shoulders, basically. Alright, so I'm going to take half a second and look at the... Dave skips messages, so it was a bookmark for him to see if he reads it. Don't ignore the child parent, just nest the child parent. That was 12:45, so that was 15 minutes ago. Okay. Don't ignore the child parent, just nest the child parent on an arm empty and just move the parent. I'm not sure what you mean by ignore the child parent. Nest the child parent on the arm on an empty and just move the parent. Oh, I know. I think I know what you're saying. Okay, so let me, I'll come back to that here in just a second, Dead Pianist. I think I know what you're saying. I like stacking the flats sometimes. So I don't like field names. I think you meant 2.9 series. Yeah, I probably did. Thank you for correcting me. Okay, I think what Dead Pianist is making a very good point, and I will say in all honesty that I had already thought of this. But I think what Dead Pianist is saying is this. We have basically a what you could call a Z ordering problem here in the animation. Well, the simple way to solve that is actually to go ahead and just put another empty up here and then parent this empty to this one. So Control P. Alright, and we're not setting any animation keyframes or anything, but now, since this is already animated, we're kind of muddying up the works if we go ahead and change its position in Z space. And to be accurate, guys, just so you know, for me, the way I have Blender set up, this is not actually Z space. This is actually Y space. For me, Z is up and down, but that's a whole nother thing that I do for my own reasons. But now, by having that second empty involved, we can go G to go on the Y-axis and just move the whole thing forward a little bit. And then this is unaffected, so all the animation carries on the way it was before. And I think that's what you were trying to tell me to do, weren't you, Dead Pianist? It's definitely good advice. It does muddy up your scene a little bit, so there's always a bit of a debate between going back and cleaning things up and doing it correctly versus, you know, just solving the problem quickly like I did right there. So it is a bit of a tug of war. But the interesting thing about that too in this case is if you wanted to, you could also grab this grease pencil object of Vespigi and you could arguably parent that to the empty as well. Alright, so I'm going to hit the P key. And now that actually gives us just another way to adjust the overall framing of the shot if we want to do that. Now, to be fair, that's probably not the best way to do it. In this case, it would make probably more sense to look at my outliner, turn on my camera, and then hit the 0 key in the numpad to look through the camera and just go ahead and hit GX to move around on the X-axis and just make an adjustment of the camera. Or, in this case, since he's centered, I kind of like that. So let me go ahead and get him a little off center. So there's that. And then let's grab the Golic object and just take the Golic object and move it to a better location. So that really is probably my shot right there. Okay? And by the way, well, I don't know, Amar, on the mirror modifier, let me go back to this. On the mirror modifier, all the mirroring was happening exactly where you would expect it to. So it did appear that the center point for the mirror was sort of in the intuitive place you would expect, and it seemed to work. So I'm not sure. But I'm going to go ahead and hit apply so that the mirroring is baked in. And now what we need to do is figure out how we're going to animate the overall look of the character in the keyframe. So what we're going to do is turn the sketch back on. so we can see what we did, and we want it to be a little less exaggerated. So the face is going to come down a little bit, and all we have to do is create a second keyframe. Once that's done, everything else is going to be easy. So here's the way I think I would do that. Let me unlock everything, but lock the sketch. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go into edit mode. There's more than one way to conquer this, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here. Okay, this pose we're going to want, actually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand this up a little bit so I got a little more yeah. So I am going to duplicate this here. So I'm basically catching up the shadows to the rest. So I'm making a duplicate frame because once we get this right, I'm sorry, I wanted auto lock to be off, but then just lock the sketch. Okay, so now we've got two frames that should be the same, right? So, but it's the previous one where we need to change things. So what I'm going to do is in edit mode, I am going to hit Alt-A so I select everything. I'm going to, just to keep it a little more reasonable, I'm going to turn that down. The danger we're going to have here, I'm going to go ahead and select most of his head. So the danger we're going to have is that we're going to cause distortion down here if we're not careful. So what I want to do is I want to get a fairly rigid selection that gives me a little bit of a buffer zone between his face and his, well, I guess you'd say mainly his shoulders. So actually I would say, truthfully, I probably want to select this stuff on the inside. It's really just the outside we don't want to affect. So if I hit the G key now, watch what happens if I hit the O key to turn on proportional editing. Okay, and now I can expand that range of influence a little bit. And I think if I hit GZ and then hit the Shift key, I should be able to sneak this down kind of in the zone of where the pencil test showed it. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab his shoulders. I'm going to just grab a little piece of his shoulders here and a little piece of his shoulders here. You could do this with a sculpting tool as well, obviously. So G key Z, and now I'm going to turn the influence up a little bit. And look at that. It's actually even affecting his smile a little tiny bit. Perfect. I think it's perfect. So now I'm going to hit the B key, the box select key, and grab these keyframes. As you can see, the keyframes from the sketch are protected. So now I should be able to duplicate these like that. And looky what we get. Watch this. There you go. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. All right, so the sketch can be turned off. We don't need to see it. And I could actually hit Control F12 and render this and see what it's looking like in the show. Obviously, we still need to ink Golik. We still need to add shadows to his hand, and probably a background would be useful. Right? Okay, so let's jump over here, and we see Asher make his comment. And there we go. I like this. I'm definitely liking this. And if you want to kind of drive the anime concept a step further, we could actually have Golik having those little rectangles around his head, dancing around his head, that show somebody who's getting irritated. So, not bad. Not bad. So let's go back here. That's where he greets Asher. So that's the first time we see Vespigi. I like it. I like it. I think it was the right choice. So additive drawing would have helped with some of the preceding drawing of the eye, since only the eye changed. Yeah, sort of. Well, the problem I had was that I pasted in the changed eyes, and at some point, and I don't even know when I did it, I inadvertently Well, I know what happened. I went into a new, here's what I did. I went into a new frame and I pasted in the eyes, which created a new keyframe. But the problem is I needed to actually first duplicate the lines and the fills. I don't remember where I was at in the process, but I needed to duplicate it and then paste in the eyes so that I was actually pasting it into a frame that was otherwise exactly the same. So anyway, one of those things. We're actually looking at the render here, so. And I think with that, I am done. It is 1:11. We've had almost 3 hours. And I'm pretty happy. I like what we've accomplished here. Doing stuff inside of Blender. I think probably, let me look at how this is looking in terms of the, let's go to good, full. Let's kind of go back to the, I just want to let a little bit of this stuff play out. So this is all done, as hand-drawn animation. He welcomes Asher. Golik has a snarky comment. And then Asher makes his comment, which of course is a little bit of a barb pointed at Golik, which makes the king chuckle. Okay, so not horrible. Let me look at one thing here. Yeah, I mean, you could talk about cleaning up this little bit of stuff at the top, but the truth of the matter is, once the background's in there, you're probably not going to see that. I do find this a little disconcerting. It does look like some of the alpha around the edge of this layer is not quite being interpreted correctly. So that's concerning. Probably this needs to be toned down. So all in all, it went well. I think using the sculpting tools in this way were quite efficient. So the only thing that's really bugging me in the shot is the hand. I want to look at that in Blender and see what's kind of going on there. I think honestly, I think maybe I double pasted at some point, because a lot of these outlines are like they're double lines, which is quite a disaster actually. In that there's no easy way to fix that, probably. There is a way. Yeah. Why did that double? So what you would have to do, first of all, you'd be deleting all of your duplicate frames. Just so we're clear, all these duplicates would be deleted, because we're going to have to, clean up the first couple instances. But here, it's in the lines layer. And if we go into edit mode, it might have something to do with the mirror modifier as well. But if we delete those strokes, so I'm clicking anywhere, then hitting L so that it selects linked, which means it selects all the points in the stroke. And that would appear to be doing the trick. So I'm going to grab these. I'm going to clean those guys up. Yeah. Come on. Grab that. Grab that. L key. Okay. So we also have to clean up that one. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what happened there. I'm pretty sure it has something to do with the mirror modifier, but no big deal. Okay, the other thing I didn't like was these little doodles I put underneath his beard. I thought they didn't quite work, so I'm going to just grab that, select linked, X, And I'm going to go through and clean all those out. Select linked. I think I can actually go through and select linked on each of the frames. So I'm hitting the L key. And I think, but we'll see, I think it will remember my selection. Yeah, it did. So that means I can go ahead and select linked. And now I can just go X, strokes, go to the next frame. As you can see, it's already selected for me. Strokes, next frame, X, strokes. So that's kind of useful. Definitely an efficient way to clean up a problem. Okay, so now we got to go back and look at this. 1, 2, so these from here, we hit the box select, and we select all of these. Delete them. Okay, same thing here, box select, duplicate, and there we go. Whoops. Hitting the G key to move those into position. Okay, so that looks pretty good, and with that, that brings us pretty close to the 3-hour mark, and I would say I'm basically done for today. And this afternoon I'll be offline, probably doing a little work on music on the show. So if anybody has any final questions. There's real snow on the ground. Yep. Yeah, it's pretty thin blanket here, I would say. Merge by distance, that I don't know. I wouldn't have a clue, Sifter. You know, flattening and merging and things like that with grease pencil layers. It did change quite a bit from 2.7.9 to the 2.8 plus series, so I don't think I've even had occasion to mess with it. Cutting and pasting strokes clearly works. I mean, because I just did it. So, oh yes, multi-frame edit as well at the top. I have not yet used multi-frame. So multi-frame edit is something I can't even speak to. I kind of get in principle how it might be useful, but I'll leave that to you, Amar, to demonstrate yourself in a video perhaps. So again, if there's no questions, I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. And as usual, you guys, there definitely will be more later.